everyone. Welcome to the Vancouver Writers Fest. We are so pleased that you could join us here today. My name is Leslie Hertig, and I'm the Artistic Director at the Writers Fest. The Vancouver Writers Fest carries out its work and this event here today on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We are very grateful to be here. This is a great event this morning. We are big fans of Kenneth Oppel here at the festival. He's visited our stages multiple times over the years with his books that have ranged from Silver Wing to Airborne to Half Brother. I could go on and on and on listing all these titles and we'd run out of time. He has sold millions of copies worldwide, and now he's here with this latest trilogy, the Bloom trilogy, and this latest one here, Hatch. Before I bring Kenneth on, I do want to just give a shout out to our government sponsors, CMHC Granville Island, the Department of Canadian Heritage, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of BC, the BC Arts Council, and the City of Vancouver. We could not put this festival on without you. Now, over to Kenneth Oppel. He's going to tell us all about this new trilogy. Ken, welcome. So glad you're here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a treat to visit the West Coast, even if it's virtually. So thank you. And thank you everyone for joining me. I am going to introduce you to my two latest books, Bloom and Hatch, which are books 1 and 2 of a new trilogy I've started on. And I think it's best just to sort of take you right into the beginning. So I'll tell you a little bit about Bloom first. I'm going to save time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions that you wanted to ask me, just feed them into your comments and I will address them towards the end. So this is a series of books that is set on a place that's very important to me. Place I visited many, many times when I was growing up in Victoria. And it is the Salt Spring Island. It's beautiful. Farms and marinas and ferry boats and a charming town of Ganges. It's a good bookstore, at least one there. And my three main characters live on Salt Spring Island, and they are Anaya, Petra, and Seth. And Anaya is allergic to everything. She has food sensitivities, seasonal allergies. She has asthma or allergy-induced asthma. And she has gone through her life since adolescence, feeling very self-conscious about herself and how she presents herself to the world. She really doesn't like the limitations that all her allergies have placed on her. And as my story opens, there's a tremendous rainfall on Salt Spring Island. And as Anaya is going home from school, she sees growing in this dead patch in her front lawn where nothing is grown for as long as she can remember, this very strange grass, and she's never seen it before. Let me show you this grass. Sorry, we're still looking at Salt Spring here. And it starts off being quite small, but very quickly she starts to see it all over the island. And her father is a botanist who works at an experimental farm on Salt Spring Island. He posts pictures of this plant on a website called Plant ID. And before long, he's getting hundreds and hundreds of posts, people all over the world who've also spotted this strange black grass. No one has really seen it before. But when it grows very fast. It's thick like bamboo. It's incredibly spiky. You can't really see the spikes in this picture. But within 24 hours, this stuff has grown 6 feet high. And it's taking over all the farmland, all the pasture. People try and cut it down and it just grows back very quickly the next day. No herbicide seems to work on it. You can burn it, but it releases toxic fumes that sear people's lungs. So that's not an answer to getting rid of it. So no one knows where this stuff has come from or how to destroy it. Now, when this grass grows to its full height, it produces this beautiful bloom at the top. And from this bloom, it produces pollen. And it literally sprays or coughs this pollen into the air. And everyone on the island is incredibly allergic to this pollen. It produces terrible sort of cold symptoms, flu-like symptoms. And so it's incredibly debilitating. And the only person on the island, seemingly, who's not affected by this pollen is Anaya. and actually 2 other kids. These are my heroes, Anaya, Petra, and Seth. They're not sneezing, they're not developing flu-like symptoms, and people think, why are these kids not affected by this pollen that's affecting everyone else? So I've got 3 heroes in this trilogy. And after this black grass appears and takes over not only the island, but increasingly the planet, other plants start to appear. And they make the black grass look sort of benign and friendly. There are things that are like snaky vines that have little pods hanging from them that catch small animals, maybe a bird, maybe a squirrel, and digest them in their little sacs. This vine also can snake into your house, and it produces a very sickly sleeping gas that can put you to sleep. And maybe when you're asleep, it'll just decide to grow down your nose. I have also in this book water lilies that spit acid-coated seeds. My favorite, though, is something called a pit plant. And what this plant does is, it's actually simpler if I just read a little bit from Bloom to show you these pit plants. I'm going to read you a very short scene with Anaya and Petra and Seth on their school field. And the field starts opening up. Holes start opening up in the earth, and they see a baby deer that's wandered in the field disappear. And everyone's terrified of what's happening. Anaya is with a very close friend of hers called Teresa, and Teresa is horrified, and she panics, and she starts to run. And Anaya is running after her to try and stop her, to keep her still on solid ground. Here's what happens. Anaya caught up to Teresa and grabbed her arm with both hands, just as the earth collapsed. Teresa plunged feet first, dragging Anaya after her head first. In a cascade of soil, Anaya skidded down the slick purple funnel and jolted to a stop, upside down. Her head and shoulders were wedged between the plant wall and Teresa's ankles. Through the narrow gap between their bodies, she got an upside-down view of Teresa shouting for help at the circle of cloud-streaked sky. They must have been 6 feet under in this strange vegetable sack. From outside, she heard some muffled shouting and a few high-pitched shrieks. "Can you jump?" Anaya hollered at Teresa. Anaya winced as her friend's knees banged against her ribs and her shoes knocked her skull, but their bodies were so tightly jammed together that Teresa couldn't make a proper jump. "Help!" Teresa yelled again. No one was coming. Anaya felt something cobwebby against her cheek. From the slick plant wall, long silver hairs lifted and brushed against her. In revulsion, she tried to jerk her face away. She couldn't even use her hands. One was pinned uselessly near the top of her skull, the other at her hip. She blew hard at the little hairs. Tiny pores perforated the plant wall, and through these pores now came a pale mist. "What's that smell?" Teresa demanded. It was sickly sweet. The top of the plant quivered and started to close, its fleshy lips compressing. "No," Teresa wailed. "No, no, no!" "Teresa," Anaya shouted, "just climb over me." The circle of sky shrank. It was getting darker. The cloying smell intensified. Teresa yanked her feet free and planted one in Anaya's armpit, the other on her backside. "Just go," Anaya grunted. "I feel so weak," Teresa said, and her voice sounded dopey. "Just jump already." What was taking her so long? But instead of pushing off, Teresa sagged listlessly against the wall. Anaya pulled down her knees and wrenched herself in so many directions. She was amazed she didn't tear every muscle in her body, but the funnel walls had a surprising amount of give, and she elbowed and kicked her way upright. Now she and Teresa were squished together face to face. Her friend's eyes had a strange, unfocused look. With a wet smacking sound, the top of the plant shut completely, and they were plunged into darkness. "Your lighter," Anaya said. "Grab your lighter." "Can't reach it." Teresa's words were slurred. Anaya's hands dived into the tight pockets of Teresa's jeans until she found the lighter. She pulled it out and dragged her thumb over the wheel. A flame blossomed in the darkness. Teresa's head lolled and knocked against Anaya's shoulder. "Teresa, wake up." Yeah, I'm awake," Teresa said, blinking. In the flickering light, the walls trembled and then glistened. From all the tiny pores, moisture beaded and formed little rivulets. Cutting through the sickly perfume was the acrid smell of burning leather and rubber. Anaya looked down and saw a puddle forming at their feet. Smoke curled from the bottoms of their shoes. "Oh my God," breathed Anaya. "Acid. Teresa, don't touch the walls." So that's what happens on the school field with these strange, I call them pit plants in the book. And what they do is they just wait patiently under the ground for their prey to walk overhead. Maybe it's a deer, maybe it's a raccoon or a coyote or a human. And the prey falls into the sac seals, and these digestive enzymes fill up the sac and dissolve the prey and eat it. So I'm not giving anything away when I say Anai does get out of this sac, as do Seth and Petra, and they alone are completely unharmed by these acid enzymes. Lots of other people are seriously injured in this incident, but my three heroes are not. And again, they seem unique. And so by this time in the story, a lot of attention is being directed to the kids. And scientists are wondering if we can study these kids, find out what is special about their DNA perhaps, or their biochemistry, maybe we can make a vaccine or a cure to make the rest of the human population immune to these plants that are spreading, proliferating all over the planet, and we don't seem to be able to get rid of them. So my characters are actually helicoptered off of Salt Spring Island and taken to this place, which you probably all know about. It's just off Stanley Park, called Deadman's Island. It's this little naval base attached to Stanley Island by this causeway. I've visited once. It's a fascinating place. I actually gave a lecture there once. But in my story, Deadman's Island has been repurposed as a military base and a biomedical facility. And it's here that my three characters are housed, and they're being studied under the guidance of someone called Stephanie Weber, who works for CSIS and is herself a biochemist, trying to find out what is unusual about my three heroes. And during the course of the book, my three characters are going to find out some pretty amazing things about the plants that have invaded the planet, and maybe how to get rid of them. And they're also going to make some really startling discoveries about themselves in the course of Bloom, Hatch, and the third book, Thrive. So I had a huge amount of fun populating my book with these really mean plants, essentially. And a lot of people ask me, how did you come up with these terrifying plants? And the truth is, you don't have to look that far. I've written about a lot of strange creatures in the course of my career. I've written about bats, and I've written about flying creatures in the sky. I've written about chimpanzees. I've written about Victor Frankenstein as a young man. And I love monsters. But it turns out there are plenty of monstrous things on the planet to inspire us. So let me just show you some of the earthly plants that gave me the ideas for all these terrifying plants in my book. I was lucky enough to have a friend who's a botanist, Dr. Stephen Weber, here in Ontario, and he actually introduced me to a lot of plants that grow right here that are not so dissimilar to scary things we find on our planet. So let me show you some of these. So my black grass is largely inspired by bamboo. Bamboo is probably one of the fastest growing plants on the planet. It can grow, I think, 3 feet in 24 hours. My black grass in the Bloom books grows even faster. It can grow about 6 feet in 24 hours, incredibly fast growing. Now I made some adaptations to mine. It's spiky, it is combustible, and it produces these incredibly allergenic pollens. The other inspiration was another grass from Earth called Phragmites, which in Ontario is a real problem. It's a true invasive plant. As you can see, it grows incredibly high. And my botanist friend said, we really have a lot of trouble controlling it. We really don't know how to get rid of it. It seeds itself very, very rapidly. And plants are really, they have a certain intelligence. Plants can actually wage war in the soil against other plants. They can release chemicals that make it very difficult for other plants to grow. So underneath the soil, they can form these huge fungal networks and basically, poison the soil to any other plant than themselves. So they can be pretty clever about how they spread. Carnivorous plants. I have these carnivorous plants in my story, and you've probably all heard of Venus flytraps. They're so distinctive with those sort of spiky half moon leaves that snap shut. The plant snaps shut due to water pressure. They just build up water pressure inside them, and it sort of triggers this reflex that makes them snap shut when something touches the inside. But there's also the really interesting plants called pitcher plants that are much more like my pit plants. They're sort of funnel shaped, and there's liquid at the bottom. And an animal will typically land on the edge because it smells quite sweet inside, and they might slip, they might fall, and once they're down there, it's very hard to crawl out, and they eventually drown and do indeed get digested. So this is the pitcher plant, one of my inspirations for the pit plants in my book. They even look kind of alien. That one at the top left, it looks like a cobra. I don't trust that thing for a second. And in terms of poisons, plants are very well known for producing terrible substances. There's something called hogweed. It looks quite nice, looks quite friendly. That's not going to hurt anyone. The leaves, I admit, look a bit spiky. But the sap of this stuff triggers incredible allergic reactions in a lot of people. So if you touch this stuff, you get these incredible blisters, your hand swells up. It's a serious business. There are also other varieties of plants that can cause blindness if their sap or their juices get in your eye. I have lots of water lilies in my bloom book. Water lilies are fascinating. When you see them from underneath like this, they kind of look a little bit alien, without any assistance. The way the light shines through them and that central stem sort of comes up. It's very War of the Worlds, I think. And they're so pretty. They often produce a flower that produces a bloom and maybe seeds. In my bloom books, these seeds are shot out and they're coated in acid. So when they hit their prey, they actually embed themselves in their prey and grow inside them. So they actually grow themselves out of their prey. But this idea of shooting seeds is partly inspired by the sandbox tree, which is a southern hemisphere tree, grows in the Amazon in South America. I mean, it looks scary just to look at this thing. It's got these sort of cone-shaped spikes all over its trunk. But the really exciting thing about this tree is this little pumpkin-sized fruit it produces. And this fruit, when it's ripe and ready to release its seeds, explodes. And the seeds come shooting out of it at a speed of 150 miles an hour and can fly as far as 60 feet. So I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. I want something like that in my story. So you can see there's no end of things here on the planet to inspire me when it comes to thinking up my creatures. I was actually quite worried when I started the book about whether I could find interesting plants. Can I make plants scary? I mean, it seemed like quite a challenge, but in the end, I think it worked out just fine. Which brings us to the second book, Hatch. During the first book, my three heroes are really concerned with trying to figure out how to stop these plants from essentially taking over the planet, because these plants are crowding out all the crops. They're going to cause mass starvation. They've made cities, streets, and towns and fields basically uninhabitable because people are afraid to walk because they don't want to be sucked into these carnivorous pit plants. They're just waiting for them. So during bloom, my three characters are trying to figure out ways to stop the plants. What are their weaknesses? What are their vulnerabilities? And the answer may come from themselves, learning more about themselves, because there's a secret that's revealed at the end of bloom that's really quite important going into the next book. So just as bloom starts with a rainfall and seeds being carried by this rain and growing all over the earth, Hatch starts with a rainfall as well. This rainfall is a little bit different. Again, I'm just going to read you a little bit from the beginning of the book. This wasn't normal rain. It came as a sudden deluge, pockmarking the water and misting Anaya's view of the battered city across the harbor. It lashed down on the field of Deadman's Island where she stood with Mom and Dad, Petra and her parents, Seth, and Dr. Stephanie Weber. And it wasn't right. Mostly it was real rain. Anaya could feel it wet against her face, but among the raindrops were ones that were too big to be normal. They didn't soak into the earth, but they bounced and settled on the grass like gleaming, translucent beads. It's hail, Mom said. Anaya's mother was a pilot, and Anaya knew she'd seen all kinds of severe weather. Hail in May was weird, but not impossible. And Anaya wanted it to be hail. But near her feet, One of the gleaming beads quivered, swelled, and then burst. She stepped back with a gasp as something swift and wet uncoiled from inside. It happened so quickly that she couldn't tell the thing's size or shape, except that it seemed too big to come from such a tiny space. In a second, it had burrowed into the earth and disappeared. "Did you see that?" she cried. "Eggs," her father said, kneeling down as more of them hatched. Their squirming cargo slithered into the grass. Her father lunged and caught something in his cupped hands, but it squirted between his fingers and was gone. "Holy crap," said Seth. "What are they?" "There's hundreds of them," Petra gasped, stamping with her foot. Anaya's shoulders jerked at the sound of a gunshot. Across the field, a soldier fired a pistol uselessly at the ground until someone yelled at him to stop. "They're everywhere," she heard another soldier shout. "We need specimens," Dr. Weber was saying with remarkable calm. Anaya spotted several more trembling eggs nestled among the blades of grass. She snatched the coffee cup from Petra's father and splashed out the contents. Dropping to her knees, she scooped up the eggs and snapped the plastic lid back on. "Good thinking," said Dad. "Let's get that to the lab," Dr. Weber said. "Fast." As quickly as it had come, the rain subsided. Anaya rushed toward the main building. She felt like she was clutching a grenade. Against the waxed paper of the cup was a sudden churning and scratching. "I think they're hatching," she said. So that's the beginning of Hatch, the second book. So I think you can see the pattern that's emerging in my trilogy. In the first book, plant life arrives on our planet. And in the second book, insect life arrives. And again, different creatures hatch out of different eggs. And my heroes, Anaya, Petra, and Seth, are occupied with trying to figure out how to get rid of these new creatures. So again, I got to do what I like best, which is create new worlds and new creepy crawly creatures. And just like the plants, I had lots of help from our natural world. Here, let me just show you some of the things that that got me going for Hatch. So what do we got here? Worms. Now, these things look pretty terrifying, but these are from our planet. Some of these things are maybe hookworms on the left, on the right. I'm not sure what the one on the upper right is. On the left, this is a vent worm. These are these worms that live way, way, way at the bottom of the ocean and cling to these thermal vents and sort of get their heat and sustenance and I think food around the vents. By magnifying something, you really, you really get to see all its constituent parts. I mean, if you magnified us, it would be probably pretty terrifying too. But it's pretty inspiring to take a look at these and just imagine them bigger and really very close to you, as in about to eat you. So I have some creatures in my book that are enormous worms, and they eat pretty much everything. They eat rebar, they eat metal, they eat concrete. So they're incredibly destructive. They can chew through buildings, they can undermine skyscrapers and bring them toppling down. And they would, just hoover through, human beings, no problem. So those are some of the inspirations for my worm-like creatures. I have these creatures called mosquito birds. And when you take a look at mosquitoes up close, they're pretty interesting. I mean, they've basically got this huge needle or syringe attached to their face that they plunge into your skin to take out your blood. Their eyes are fascinating. The closer you get, the more facets they have. You never really think of a mosquito as being hairy, but when you get up close, you can see all these little tiny, cilia or hairs jutting from their little insect limbs. The one on the bottom right is actually, I think it may even be an electron microscope view of their legs. They have these really interesting legs. So again, I used images like this to inspire my mosquito birds in Hatch, which are they're sort of like bats and birds, skeletal birds that flutter around. They do bite, but they're not so much as taking things out of you. My mosquito birds are actually injecting things into you. It turns out to be a terrible virus that, again, is really, really devastating to the Earth's population. And Anaya is instrumental in developing a vaccine for this. So mosquitoes, very useful little creatures on our planet. I have aquatic creatures that hatch from the eggs. They grow very quickly. So I took a look at water strider, beetles. You can see that one in the center. And on the left, they have a really interesting proboscis or nose. It looks kind of like an anteater when you look at it. Very long tongue. And they just sort of plunge this into things. And I think they have an enzyme they inject that sort of liquefies the interior of their prey and just slurps it out, which I find quite terrifying. On the right, you've got a good old praying mantis, who, when looked at up close, is really, it's like a dragon, really. It's got sort of a crest and blades, mandibles, awesome stuff. So there's all sorts of critters that are hatching out of the eggs in my book. Hatch, and they have all sorts of weaponry at their disposal. They have, there's one that has an acid spray, and there are really beetles called barbardier bugs that spray out boiling acid at their adversaries. Not just acid, but boiling acid. It jets out of this little gland on their posterior. So again, incredible stuff. Our natural world is so full of wonders, and looked at up close, really some horrors too. So I had no problem getting inspired by what's on our planet for my monstrous creatures. So that gives you a little idea of what's happening in Hatch. And in the third book, Thrive, you will finally get to meet who is responsible for sending down all this delightful flora and fauna on the planet. Now, one thing I have neglected to mention in my talk so far is that while all this is going on, the Earth being taken over by plants and now insects and birds and mammals, as it turns out at the end of Hatch, new mammals, my own characters are undergoing some very, very radical changes to their own bodies. And the changes that they're undergoing are probably going to offer a clue to what is going on, or who is responsible, I should say, for who is sending all these creatures down on the planet. So in the third and final book, Thrive, you get to meet the people responsible. And when you start to think about the things that are happening to my three characters, the changes they're undergoing, you get little clues about who is responsible for what's going on the planet. So the details I've shown are, claws, looks like could be kangaroo claws. It's hard to know. Something that looks a bit like a scorpion tail, feathers, a crest. These are some of the things that are going on in throughout the three books and give you clues about what's going to happen in the final book, Thrive. So I had a lot of fun populating this world, inventing invasive species, and thinking about my characters. In many ways, it's just a survival story. It's a resourceful adventure story. My three kids are trying to find the reason and the solution to the problems that are plaguing the planet, but they're also undergoing these radical transformations of their own. So, when they say it's hard being a teenager, my characters are really having a hard time being teenagers because they're coping with all the usual stuff, plus invasions, plus their own bodies altering in ways that are both terrifying and exhilarating as well. So it's a mixed blessing, the kinds of changes they're undergoing in my book. Now, I've talked for almost half an hour. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check out the chat to see if you guys had any questions you wanted to ask me. And I'm going to try and answer as many as I can in the time that I have. All right. Okay, we've already got some questions here. Okay. All right. From Aaron, what inspired you to make the book? Well, I think I've sort of hinted at that already. I really like inventing creatures, but I should say that Bloom was really largely inspired by a dream, a nightmare my daughter had, my eldest daughter. And when she told it to me, I knew I had to use it in a story somehow. And the dream was as follows. My daughter was walking outside and it started to rain. She realized it wasn't rain, it was tiny eggs just sort of hailing down and hatching on the ground, releasing these tiny little creepy crawly creatures. So in the dream, my daughter runs for shelter under a big bridge. And when she gets under the bridge, she sees the biggest egg of all hatching and releasing the biggest monstrous creepy crawly creature that's actually in the process of eating a man under the bridge. So when she told me this nightmare, I thought, you've got to use this. And it made me think of, it's an amazing scene. And I do use that scene pretty much at the end of Bloom and the beginning of Hatch. I read it to you essentially. But it made me think of why it was raining eggs. And maybe there was a step before that part, which was in fact Bloom. So thank you for that question. Melina said, we are watching as a class and they have a question, what inspired you to write this book? I think I've done that one. How long did it take you to write the book? A book like this takes me about a year and a half. The trilogy was a little different because I was essentially writing 3 books every time I was writing 1 book. So the first book actually took me the longest because I wanted to make sure I had all the pieces in place and the characters, so that books 2 and 3 would make sense. But on average, about a year and a half for my other books. And someone else has asked me, what inspired you to write this trilogy? Okay, I think I've done that one, so I'll go on to this one. Nilly in grade 6, did you ever think you were going to be a writer when you were younger? Did you enjoy writing when you were younger? I did very much. One of my favorite things to do at school was write a short story or a poem when it was assigned. And I liked it so much, I did a lot of it in my spare time. So even though it wasn't for marks, no one was making me do it, I really enjoyed writing stories about whatever it was I was most excited about at the time. So when I was 10, it was all Star Wars fan fiction, essentially. Laser guns and spaceships and people zapping each other across the galaxies. And then I got into a game called Dungeons and Dragons, a role-playing game, which I loved because it was like being in a story that you were partly creating just by your actions in the game. And increasingly, I wrote stories about characters who went into dungeons and fought dragons and goblins and looked for treasure. And then I got into video games and wrote a story about a kid like me who was obsessed with a certain video game. So I loved writing. No one was forcing me to do it. And my stories just got a little bit longer as I went along. And I think by the time I was 13, I decided that I wanted to be a writer. There was nothing else that I could imagine that I thought would be as satisfying as creating my own stories. So yeah, I thought about being a writer for a long time. Megan, you asked what inspired you to write about bats. I was introduced to bats by a friend who was very interested in them and actually built little bat boxes, houses for them that he would nail up on trees at his family's farm. And he got me really curious. So I went to the library and got out a few books, and I got very intrigued by these creatures because they're nocturnal, they see with sound, they go on big migrations. There just seemed to be a lot of very unique things about these animals. And I wanted to see if I could make them the center of a story. So I came across the idea of their migrations, and some of them are very long. And I wondered about how they remembered their route. Did they have maps? Did they have landmarks to guide them on their migratory paths? And when I started thinking about the migration, I thought, what would happen if you were a young bat who was on his first migration and you got lost? How would you catch up with your colony? And just like that, Shade, my main character, was born. And I imagined this incredible quest he was on to be reunited with his family after being separated from them. So that's how I got into bats. And Luca has asked, what do you like more, reading or writing, and why? Well, Luca, reading is an absolute pleasure. I'm getting to enjoy someone else's story, so I get to take time off and just be swept up and taken somewhere and shown things I haven't seen before and think thoughts that I haven't experienced before. Writing is, I do love writing. There's nothing else I'd rather do, but it's also my job. So there are lots of days when the job feels a little too much like a job. Like I'd like to be, a little less of a job. But I do love writing. But they're two very different things in my life. Shaylee and Emily, why did you choose to become an author? What inspired you when you were young, and what inspires you now? Well, I talked a little bit about my earlier inspirations, and they were just things that I was fascinated by, Star Wars, role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons. And it really hasn't changed. I'm still writing about things that interest me. It might be airships, it might be trains, it might be wasps, it might be Victor Frankenstein as a young man. It might be, alien vegetation that's suddenly appearing on our planet. whenever you write a story, it's like a 1.5 year long relationship. So you've got to be sure that you really are interested in the subject matter. You've got to be excited about it because you need to stay motivated as you write and stay engaged in the story. So usually the things I write about are often based on subjects that I find truly interesting. Let me see. Diana asked, do you have a favorite author? I have so many, it almost seems unfair to pick one out. But certainly when I was younger, my favorite author was Roald Dahl, who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and James and the Giant Peach and all those books. And to this day, Danny, Champion of the World is still one of my all-time favorite books. It's not Roald Dahl's most famous book, but to me, it's his most, I don't know, it's a more personal story. It's a more realistic story than some of his, kinder story. And I've read it as an adult, and it's still a great book. Nika asked, do you have problems or frustrations when writing? Oh, Nika, yes, I do. Every day, practically, there are little frustrations and little problems. Luckily, I've never been afflicted with full-fledged writer's block where I haven't been able to write for weeks or months. But every day poses little struggles. What did that character say? What's going to happen in this next scene? Does it have to happen? Is it not a great scene? Why does my character seem so wooden? This person doesn't seem like a real person at all. So what I've learned over the years is to try not to worry so much about the quality of my writing when I'm writing, especially a first draft. It will not be fantastic the first time around. It so rarely is. So the important thing is just to keep writing, because in the act of writing, you'll get more ideas. You will think your way out of problems. Even if you're writing lousy sentences, eventually you'll write a good one. So it's very important for me to always sort of keep up the momentum. If I get stuck in one place, I'll jump to another place in the story and write there. And then after I've done that bit, maybe I'll be able to go back and unlock what was keeping me stuck in that particular location. So yeah, it's basically this endless process of problem solving, writing a book. But that's how I look at it. Every writer's different. I'm a bit of a control freak by nature. So naturally, when I approach a novel, I turn it into a whole series of problems. That's for my psychiatrist to figure out. Daniel asked, how do you choose what to write about? Well, as I said, it usually chooses me. I keep, these ideas notebooks, and in these ideas notebooks, I, fill them with pages and pages of possible ideas and, jottings and bubbles. And not every idea becomes a story, but I have lots of raw material. And if an idea is particularly intriguing, I tend to go back to it again and again and again. And that tells me there's something special about this idea, to me anyway. And often that is a sign that it deserves to be turned into a full-fledged book. Pedram asked, how old were you when you published your first book? My first book, I think, was published. It just came out when I was leaving high school. So I just turned 18. I got a very lucky and early start. And after that, I went to university. And so for the next 4 years, I was basically busy with my studies. And I didn't write another book until my last year of university. So 4 years after my first one was published. Actually, that's not true. I did write another book, and it was so bad no one would publish it. So it took me a while to figure out a good story and figure out a new way of writing. Bahar asked, what inspired you to write about bats? I've talked a little bit about bats already. They're just such interesting animals. Lots of books have been written about puppies and piglets and foals. But no one, as far as I knew, had written about bats. And a lot of people thought they were sort of creepy and unappealing animals. So that was a challenge to me, if I could take these mysterious, creepy creatures and turn them into something appealing. Dawn has asked, do you have more books planned after Thrive? Dawn, of course I do. This is my job. I always have stories on the go. In fact, I'm working on 2 right now. One is a sort of ghost story set around a haunted lighthouse. And the other one is, doesn't matter what the other one's about, but I'm working on two at the moment. Shannon asked, who created the artwork for your books? That's a good question. I don't do the art myself. and you should all be grateful for that because I am not a terrific artist. But the publishers are the people responsible for finding an image for the cover. They might commission an original artwork. They might use a photograph or a graphic designer or a combination of both. Some of my books have illustrations, and I've been lucky enough to work with some really great people for the artwork. Barbara Reed, whose amazing plasticine work is in my book, Pig and the Yeti, a picture book. John Klassen, who did the illustrations for a book I wrote called The Nest, and Sydney Smith, who did the illustrations for Inkling. In some of these cases, I was able to suggest these people and ask for these people specifically. In other cases, the publisher suggests possible illustrators. I've been lucky to have worked with some of the best, I think. Sarah has asked, how long have you been a writer for this audience? Well, I think it's about 30 years now, Sarah. I mean, yeah, since I wrote my first book. Dawn has said, on behalf of my class in Port Coquitlam, are your characters based on real people you know? Rarely. My characters are usually, stitched together creations, little bits and pieces of people I know, maybe family members, maybe friends, maybe pure invention. A lot of me gets filtered into all my characters, whether they're, good or bad. There have been exceptions where I've used usually my kids. In Firewing, the main character is a little bit based on my eldest daughter. And I have a character in Inkling who is very much based on my youngest daughter. So I just contradict myself. Yes, I've stolen people I know for characters. Sarah has asked, why did you choose to write about plants? Oh, Sarah, there's so much more than just plants. You have to meet these plants to think they're just more than plants. And the book is not just about plants. The book is really about 3 kids growing up. It's about their personal struggles and their dreams. It's a bit of romance in the books. It's about jealousy, envy, insecurity, finding a place in the world. Miss Coyd asked, we're watching as a class. A student made a connection to another creepy organism. Ooh, giant tardigrades. It must be difficult to choose which creatures to include in your story. I think I looked at tardigrades, and they are truly fascinating, but thank you for pointing that out. The world really is a fascinating place. Odessa asked, did the movie Alien provide inspiration for the books? Oh, yes, Odessa, Alien always provides inspiration for any book I'm writing. It's just such a great story and movie, still one of my favorite movies. So yes, I think I watched Alien and Aliens, the sequel, during the writing of this book. Also, inspirations would have been War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells and Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, another great book about a very interesting malevolent plant that takes over the world. Jacob has asked, which one of your books is your favorite? I don't have just one, Jacob. I really like, I like The Nest. I like Airborne. I like Every Hidden Thing. Doesn't mean I dislike my other books. These are just ones that I am particularly proud of because of maybe the writing or the story or something that turned out one way or another. The question, how do you choose the cover for your books? Usually I don't. Usually it is my publishers. I get to suggest and comment on, but it's usually the publisher who has the final say. What's the scariest creature I've ever created? Oh, so many. I don't know. I think maybe the wasp queen in The Nest. How do you pace yourself when it takes 1.5 years to write a book? That is a very good question. I think all I've ever done is write. So to me, the pace of a 9-to-5 workday works. And it doesn't sound romantic, but I rely less on inspiration than just dedication and moving forward. If I waited around to feel like writing or inspired, I would never finish a book. Elise asked, what series of books are you the most proud of? Probably the Airborne series. I like the Airborne series quite a lot. And I have another question here. Do you have anything to say to people who want to do something big, like being an author? Well, yes, I do. I'd like to encourage you, if you'd like to be an author, or to do anything you want to do. I've been really lucky in being able to do what I was most passionate about. And that is is no small thing in this world. I got encouragement. I had a lucky break at the beginning, and I've been able to make my career what I love doing. I think if I hadn't been able to, pay for my room and board as a writer, I would have taken another job and written in my spare time. I find that people who become writers really want to do it, and maybe want to do it more than anything else. So they're willing to take the risks involved with being a writer. You don't get a regular paycheck. There's not a lot of security in your job. There's no health plan or benefits plan or pension plan. But it's what these people most want to do. So I think if you want to be a writer, keep an ideas notebook, read as much as possible, and write in whatever way feels best to you about whatever you want. And don't get discouraged. Don't expect it to be perfect the first time. A lot of people do. So I think it's sometimes better to write a smaller, shorter thing than try and write a big epic novel the first time around. I meet a lot of young writers who have these amazing plans for Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings type epics. And that is a lot of work. That's a ton of work for any writer, no matter how experienced. But if you try and write a 4-page story, you have a better chance of finishing it. And then you get the satisfaction of completion. And it teaches you really a lot of discipline about how to tell a story in a shorter space of time. You've got to have all the same ingredients in a little story that you do in a big story. So that can be great practice too. Okay, I'm going to do one more question, and then I'm supposed to stop after 45 minutes. So I'm going to do this one from Billy. Hello, I love your books, though I have some questions. How do you make your characters feel more human? And do you have any ways to help with writer's block? Do you do a brainstorm before you write? All right, with the brainstorming, absolutely. I spend probably months writing ideas down in these books. That's my favorite part of being a writer, is just the early ideas stage, because I'm just playing around. I'm asking myself questions, I'm answering, I'm getting new ideas. It's this marvelous jumble. And then when I have what I think are the ingredients of a story, I'll do outlines. So I plan a lot up front. I like to know every major event in the story. When I get stuck, I sometimes go back and rewrite what I've written. But as I said earlier, what I most like to do is jump ahead to another part of the story. So my first drafts are often these patchwork quilts, and then I get to sew them together in the right order to make my first draft. As I said, keep writing. The only mistake you can make as a writer is not writing. And that sounds like a very wise thing to say, and maybe a good point to end my presentation on. But thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm delighted I got to be in your classrooms and have a chance to talk to you. Thank you very much, and stay well.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. We're so glad you could join us. And I always find it inspiring to listen to you talk about what a big reader you were as a kid, and how the advice you give to us for reading and writing and how to get into those stories is really good. It always makes me want to sit down with a pen and get going. So thank you for that. Good luck with the rest of your promotion, and hope to see you back here in Vancouver in what we are calling the after.
The after. I look forward to the after.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody stay well. Thank you for joining us. Bye for now.
Bye.